Hi everyone, I'm super excited to host Mark Facciani, founder of Path. I got to know about Mark from his incredible article at Last Week in Contact, and Bragan featured that article, and then I read each and every point. Is like this resonates so much. He knows so much things in the industry. Then I went through the experience, had a chance to talk to him. Just has wealth of knowledge, and I thought it would be great to host you on the show.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. When we got a chance to meet, I was so interesting how much our worlds intersect and how, closely aligned we are in terms of ideas and content and target audience of how we're trying to both help people in the industry. So it was just really cool that you reached out. And I'm so glad we got a chance to talk and excited for this today too.
Amazing. So, Mark, for people who'd like to know about your career, what are three highlights of your career?
Yeah. So I think for me, it's really kind of three chapters. And so really the most impactful chapter, number one was I was a teacher and coach for about 15 years. Prior to that, I had almost a whole nother life where I was an actor right out of college for 4 years. Had no experience, no foundation. I just decided to go for it when I realized I didn't want to do investment banking or consulting and all the things that people were kind of supposed to do with a great formal education. So I guess to a degree, I've always been looking for that path, no pun intended, of what was going to kind of fulfill my passion where I could do something impactful. So I found teaching and coaching when I was 28. And just, it was an incredible chapter of life because I feel like professionally, I grew up during that period. I got a chance to work at an amazing school called Pingree School, top independent school in the state of New Jersey, where I was a middle school history teacher and a high school and middle school wrestling coach. So incredibly rewarding. Thought I was going to be there forever, and ultimately, my career really changed on a dime where I had gotten 2 grad degrees, working nights and weekends and summers, and had gotten different accolades, and it was told I was going to be the next head of the middle school. And then I walked into the head of school's office. The job had opened up, and he let me know that his wife was going to be taking the role. And so that was a huge turning point for me because after this incredible 15 years, a path I thought that was on that was very linear, I walked out knowing I was probably going to be leaving education. And so I decided at the end of that school year, I would do exactly that. I went to people for advice. And one person I really trusted was a man named Kurt Conti. I had coached his son in wrestling and taught his son. And he said, look, I think Mark, if you want to stay in education, it's probably going to be at another school. But have you ever thought about going into business? And I really hadn't to a degree. And so, but he talked to me about the opportunity. So at the age of 4, I took a leap. I said a prayer and I came in and joined this construction company. And, not knowing I can't hammer a nail. So I know nothing about construction. I knew very little about business. And then ultimately, within 6 months after working with him and doing some special projects, I was placed in Tenna, which was a construction software company. And I think kind of a good realization for me there was even though I hadn't come from a traditional business background, education is all about two things: communicating and building teams. And so I realized, look, even though I don't have those other different pieces of experience, I can apply this to this context. And so I was tasked to go build the first version of the sales development team at Teta. And at that time, we were a really small company. And they just said, Mark, we need a team to help book more meetings. We don't know how to do it. Go figure it out. So I poured myself into it. I talked to every resource that I could find out there that knew about it. I read articles, did research, and ultimately put a plan together and hired our first team. And we had a great run, great first year. And then ultimately, I was asked after that, based on some other pieces happening in the company, to make a switch. So then I actually led operations. I led customer success for 2 years, which was great for me because it was not comfortable. It was completely different from how I was built, where you almost come in, you hold your breath, you wake up in the morning and kind of see, knowing you're going to start the day 8 hours behind of everything you left it last night, and then just kind of working through. But really, I learned about customer relationships and kind of what makes customers happy. And then I switched back to the team again for the last 3 years when I was there. And that's when having that insight from the customer side and having done it the first time, we really were able to take off as a company. And the team grew all the way up to, I think, really a maximum of about 20 when we included myself, our our sales ops, inside and outside focused SDRs. And I was really proud of that because essentially we built something from scratch. And I was thankful that I had just some great leadership that had the trust in me to be able to kind of do it my way and go through the lessons learned in that process. So to me, that highlight was the people on the team and just that experience of learning a business. And I think the third one has just been really the last year and change. I decided I was at this transition point where I had really enjoyed my work at Tenna, but I was turning 50 in 2024. And I said, you know, I don't want to wake up at 60 and regret the fact that I didn't really go for it. And so I said, I enjoyed my time at Tenna, but I want to try to do something on my own. So I took another leap and I started Path and with the intention of really running a consulting business to help B2B startups accelerate, really focusing on construction tech to help them by designing the right program, hiring the right talent, and ultimately, probably my favorite part of coaching and elevating their new SDR team to excellence. So I've been doing that for about a year and 3 months. And I think that, to me, that's a highlight because, it's really all the years and challenges and ups and downs of work that have gotten me to this point. I'm not nearly where I'd like to be on an objective achievement side and revenue side, but I'm learning so much about myself. And I think that, I can't remember who said it, but, the work kind of builds you as much as you build it. And so I'm just proud of this experience. And I think I've realized that life is not as linear as I thought. And that has been one of the major learnings of this time. And I'm trying to embrace the uncomfortable, uh, aspect of, the way I'm typically built of plans and organization and execution, getting things done, to be completely flexible and adaptable to where the road may lead, has been quite a unique challenge. And I'm just embracing every part of it.
It sounds such an incredible ride. So many changes. I was curious to know, when you joined that construction firm, there's so many unknowns regarding the knowledge, building and hiring. How did you navigate those? How did you prepare for it?
Yeah, so, I think one piece which I think every industry really requires is you need great leadership. And so I was very fortunate that right from the beginning, I had incredible access to Kurt Conti, which is kind of mind-boggling now, thinking about his number of direct reports and the number of companies he was running. So I was extremely fortunate I had him as a leader and a mentor. And then right away, I was placed in under the supervision of Anthony Blommel, who was their chief administrative officer of the Conti Group. Again, another fantastic manager that really held me accountable to all the little details. And so I know there were so many different lessons that I learned from that experience. Just, I mean, there's so many I can rattle around in my head, but so I think that was crucial for me to be able to get off to a good start. Anthony, Kurt would say little things to me like, let's say we would go over something or a project, and I had a list of different action items, and maybe I had it 90% done. And then the next week I come back and say, yeah, that's almost done. I just have to do one or two more things. And I remember one time he just stopped, took his glasses off, he put his pencil down, and he said, Mark, finish things. And he didn't have to say more than that, but that really resonated because there's really two states, done or not done. He was amazing with that. Anthony was also the same, where he told me, look, communication, always in person first, phone calls number two, email is the last resort. You lose things in translation from other forms of communication. So then I would often make the mistake of, yeah, I reached out to so and so, and he said, okay, you walk down and talk to him. And I said, no, I sent him an email. And he would stop and say, in person first, phone call second, email last resort. And so just little things like that. They're really common sense, but so important for operations. And so for me, having that kind of leadership was crucial. So then I started right from the beginning. It would challenge me to develop good habits and to be thorough and to ask a lot of questions. So I think to gain the construction knowledge, the good thing for me is I was able to take my ego out of it because I really knew nothing about construction itself. I was so new that I had to just uh, put my ego aside and ask more questions. Like equipment can be very daunting, especially because there's so many different names for different pieces of equipment in a civil construction company. So, I just had to ask a lot of questions. And then I think for me, I'm a visual guy. So I was fortunate there was a guy named George Heck who happened to be he was in partnerships when I was at Tenna. Oftentimes we would go to a job site or he'd take me to an equipment yard and he would walk me around and show me what the different pieces were and the functions they performed. And I thought, hey, once I went to a construction site the first time, I'm like, well, now I understand. Well, then the next time I went, I said, oh, well, now I understand. 20 times later, you realize every single time you go, you learn something new. For me, I think showing up and getting a hands-on experience, or at least seeing things, is just so much different. You make quantum leaps in your understanding as opposed to trying to look something up on the internet or look up a picture or even hear or listen to a podcast. So to me, showing up and doing it was always extremely important to learn about the industry because, for example, going to a civil construction site, I expected to see hundreds of people. And when I saw dozens, I was kind of surprised, like, where is everybody? But you realize, well, in civil construction, everything's horizontal, it's spread out. So you have a team working in one area. Then you might a quarter mile down the road, it might be in a different area. You have different pieces of equipment. You have trucks moving everywhere, moving materials. So people are unhuddling, staying in one space. It was completely different from my mind where I'm thinking one construction, I'm thinking everything's vertical and the crew is all there. And so that was a huge learning curve for me. So showing up was, I think, the final piece of it. And that's where I always encourage people, anytime you can get an authentic experience, you're just going to really learn about the industry in such a meaningful way.
Feels like you were gathering all the knowledge about construction by asking questions and the people around and showing up on site. If you were at this stage, right, where to write a onboarding playbook for construction, what are some steps you would recommend?
So one thing that we actually did, because I knew that experience was so impactful for me, right? We always kind of, if we have meaningful learning experiences or we have a bias, positive or negative, we're usually going to act on that. So since I knew it was so meaningful for me, every time we had a new cohort of SDR hires, we always brought them to the job site. So we built that in as part of the onboarding experience. So we would do different pieces around things in office. And we also do a couple weeks prior to that point. So this way, around week 3, we would try to bring everybody to HQ, have a couple good meals. We would prepare for the sales part of the job, but we also would take a half a day and go to a job site, do the safety training, get the hard hat, wear the boots, walk around and see feel the conditions. If it was 20 degrees, you gain a respect for the job of a foreman or superintendent. And guess what? We can sit back and talk about how great the product needs to be, but when you're out there in 20-degree weather and you take out the phone, well, guess what? If you have to take your gloves off, the app better work and a couple
Mm,
of it better be click, click, boom, and it better do what it needs. If it's pausing or it's slow or it's not working, you better believe that person's going to say, I'm not going to try that app ever again. So that experience of enduring the conditions is so meaningful because now you put the whole context together of here's what a software can do, but now here are the people that are using it, and it better work for them in the way it's outlined. Otherwise, there's no adoption. And which is kind of obviously probably another tangent for maybe this discussion or a future one of there's the sale, but then adoption is a whole different as a whole different part of the equation, which is why I'm so glad I got that time in customer success.
nice. And you mentioned the three-step framework of in-person, then call, and then email. Can you double down on that piece a bit? Like, in order to get in-person meetings, depending on the firms you're targeting, do you just like do door to door and just show up there, or how do you like decide and the whole strategy?
Okay, got it. So let me make a good distinction. So when I got that first piece of advice, that was more of a internal core communication piece of kind of advisory and leadership from that time period. However, when I was at Tenna, certainly, and I feel like this is always going to be something that I've taken with me as well. Certainly, in thinking about building a sales development team or any sales organization, I think that certainly part of our strategy was to try to get that on-site visit because again, you think about construction or you think about the average user, whether it's an equipment manager or a superintendent or even an owner in construction, you have incredibly intelligent, successful, capable people, and they're more than happy to buy $5 million cranes and $500,000 excavators, but there also sometimes comes with it that fear of technology. So, you know, using this or the computer and spending 10, 20, $50,000 on software is something that people are hesitant to do. There's going to be resistance and friction. How do you try to forge that, right? How do you try to cross that chasm? If you know the resistance is there, well, because equipment, you might find an equipment manager or a maintenance manager that literally doesn't know how to hop on a Zoom or a Google Meet. It sounds it sounds difficult to even imagine, but there's a person in the population. They're very skilled, but they're just not as technically savvy or makes them uncomfortable. So how do you solve that? Well, instead of saying, hey, we're going to meet on a Zoom, and once again, now feeling like there's a bit of a moat between my job and their job. Instead, if I can have a conversation and say, "Hey, look, my account executive Joe, he's in your area. How about he comes down tomorrow? He'll bring you a bagel, and bring you a bagel and coffee. Talk a little bit about what it is that we do, and see if it's a good fit. How's that sound? Oh yeah. Hey, you know what? That sounds great. Hey, he's going to be in town on Friday. He'd love to kind of shake your hand, learn a little bit more about you, and show us a little bit about what we do. How does that sound? That feels so much more natural in construction, which is a handshake business, as opposed to I'd like to show you a demo of my product. I'd like to hop on a Zoom call. It's not, we're in apples and oranges. We're speaking two different languages. So I think that if you can build an on-site component into the sales process, it now has an incredible component of the potential to build trust. It does not guarantee every sale, but what are you doing? Naturally, I feel as though from my experiences in life, we're gonna be better friends if you and I meet in person. So naturally, if there's that seed of doubt or that seed of mistrust, if I take the time to come meet you and we sit down together, we're gonna find a better common ground. So I think that naturally, one of the hardest things in sales is to build trust that you are what you say you are, and your product will do what it says it does. If I can show up, I would think that that really would speak to not just me as a person, as an account executive or whoever's coming in to be part of that sale, but also I care about taking the time to meet you as a person, which naturally, I think probably has an unspoken level of commitment.
So the intent is to meet in person. How do you like communicate? Let's say you have the site person you want to meet in person. Are you texting them this question? Hey, my account executive is in this area.
So I think that, typically, and again, in construction, like, I think every industry is a little bit different, but my experience is that, again, incredibly busy, the schedule drives everything, and there's always deadlines. So I think that most people, again, I guess my experience is more towards the civil side than the other side of the business, but I would say that more than often than not, the communication is going to happen over the phone. And so it's going to be phone calls because again, they're not sitting at a desk just waiting to do emails. They're out in the field, they're on the move, they're in the car. A lot of owners and C-suite executives, they're going from site to site. They're not sitting behind a desk. Maybe in more of the accounting functions, you would see that more typically, but I think because people are on the move, the phone is going to be the best way. And so that's where you can naturally have a conversation and also get into the objections right there in real time rather than having an email conversation. I also just feel, I don't know about your experience, but we're so saturated with emails now that unless there's the perfect message at the perfect time that fits my perfect need, I'm going to ignore it. So I think that the percentage of connections are low from emails. Now, as a confirmation process, if we have a set meeting, I might suggest to a team text the day of, make the phone call the day of to confirm are looking
Mm.
forward to seeing you at 2 o'clock. Never saying if the meeting time is still good. That's a key. Uh, but I would say that text can be a really useful piece to confirm, but I would never engage as a starting conversation of imagining someone would say yes, but just based on a text chain.
Got it. And so you get on the phone, call that person. If they say yes, you're going. And I'm guessing like during the daytime work hours, that side person might be busy with work. So even the timing for the initial first call is crucial because on the commute or early hours because or maybe on the lunch break.
And that's where, some of the outbound game, when we're thinking about a sales development team, just has to do with volume and organization. You're going to need to plan efficiently, again, assuming, if we take one step back, assuming you have a sufficient number of the right companies and contacts in your database that are the appropriate roles, and that data is up to date. Then, so from that foundation starting point, then you want to be organized with your outreach. So, for example, everybody's different, how many touches or calls they want to make, but I would say that typically I would like to put them on a 2 to 3 week cadence of outreach with a number of calls, because generally it's a numbers game. Chances are, if I call them at 8:15 on one day, they may or may not be there. So I might have to try them now 10 o'clock on a Wednesday and noon on a Friday, and then the next Monday try them at 3 o'clock. And so you need to have enough touches to make it happen, and that's where the emails can be a nice cover for the calls that are made. But generally, um, there's that right balance of, if I don't call enough, I'm probably not going to thread the needle and get this person on the phone. If I call too many times, then they may recognize the number and I might get blocked, or it just might be ignored. So that's where I think it's that right balance. And I think over a 2 to 3 week period provides a concentrated effort to talk to a specific contact. And then if no contact is made, no problem. Plenty of fish in the sea. Let that one move that and those others to the side, enroll a whole new number of contacts into the discussion. And then now you're trying to hit additional targets. Ideally, I think in the perfect world, if you have the chance to, again, given sufficient number of leads in the database, companies, contacts, and you have a team with enough horsepower and the tools to be organized, I would say that if you're able to reach out to everybody in your database between 2 and 4 times a year in that dedicated sequence, you're in good shape. If you do it once a year, your chances of succeeding are low. If you're doing it more than that, then I think, likely, even if you have a great, oftentimes what happens is, that, Mayur, I'm really kind of talking about, we called and had no contact and then we put them on rest. But oftentimes you'll call and somebody says, hey, this is interesting, but just not the right time. In
Mhm.
which case, now you have kind of a next touch. Maybe it's 3 months, maybe it's 2 months, maybe it's 6 months. I personally always like to take whatever number they take and cut it in half. So if they say call me in a year, I'm calling in 6 months. If they say call me in 6 months, I'm calling in three. Just because, not because I'm a bad listener or because I'm trying to do anything unsavory. I just know that the timeline I try to think about, if somebody says, hey, we're under contract for another year. So they'll say, call me in a year. Well, in my mind, I would think, if I call you in 6 months, then at this point now, this should be the starting point of thinking about another solution potentially that's going to enter the landscape. It might take me another 3 weeks to get in touch with you. We have a meeting. If there's a 30 to 60 or 90-day deal cycle, depending on the complexity of the software offering, now we're 3 months out to the expiration date. And then what does implementation look like? Right? To plan and execute an implementation could take anywhere between, depending on the complexity of a product, it could take a month, it could take 6 months or a year. So when people say that, they don't necessarily see the timeline of both the sales effort and the customer success effort that happens on the other end. Because what no one would ever want is, okay, I didn't like my solution, I'm going to choose you. But it's not as though one gets turned off on December 31st and you magically can walk it on January 1st. There's so much planning and process beforehand and afterwards. And then, of course, a training and follow up to make sure that people are using the product to its full potential. So that's where I always will take that feedback and then kind of try to adjust the timeline accordingly, just because I know the steps on both ends. And oftentimes, in my very early career, I probably did make that mistake of calling somebody in a year or closer to, and then they'll say, "Oh yeah, you know what? 4 months ago, I signed with XYZ competitor. So that does happen. So I think to that end, it's important to kind of to plan accordingly.
That's a great advice, Mark. I'm gonna write it down. Whatever they say, half by half of the time. So, I'm just trying to understand also the team structure. Is it one SDR to one account executing, like pairing, or two is to one? Just so that we get a perspective. When you say an SDR, is their job mainly leads enrichment, research, and cold calling? And if they're cold calling, are they doing 100 calls a week? Like some tactical.
Yeah, great question. So I think that it really comes down to resources and best practices. So in the perfect world, if you had, again, you have the leads in the tech stack, that you have that sufficient number, and you have, I always kind of start with this piece of telling people, did I do a biweekly webinar, and I did this maybe a month or two ago of the kind of just the steps to build a winning SDR team. And one I have 5 prerequisite questions, and one of them is, do you have a sales team and can they close deals? Right? Because if a sales team isn't closing deals, the last thing you want to do is to build an SDR team because now you might have a beautiful outbound engine that's filling the top of the funnel, and now your team is not closing deals. So now you're paying for a team and they're performing really well, but you're not getting any output on the other side. So that's where teams have to know and be successful to be able to convert on their demos, on their meetings, to be able to provide that sale. So ultimately, I think if you build the team, and in the perfect world, a one-to-one relationship would be great because now you're really synced up. You have this great personal relationship. But realistically, I think if you have one SDR serving 2 account executives, you could also be very successful. You might have a different relationship. Again, if it's one-to-one, let's say that account executive is on vacation for 2 weeks. Now, not as common in sales for someone to take a 2-week vacation these days, but when you're thinking about your overall production, it's good to have more avenues. And where I think you lose the relationship and the synergy is when it goes to 1 to 4. If you're servicing 4 different account executives, it's difficult to have great synergy with 4 relationships. If you're 1 to 1 or 1 to 2, I've seen it. I've seen teams where the AE and the SDR are talking daily, and then there's a two-way communication flow where the SDR might say, "Hey, look, I know you're doing this on site in this region. I've also got these other 3 prospects in the area. I'm going to call them and see if you can drop in and have a meeting." And the AE might come back and say, "Hey, look, hey, I know we demoed this company 90 days ago. I can't get them back on the phone. Can you try to rebook them?" So when you get that synergy and that two-way communication, things really flow. And I know back company I was working for a long time, I saw the absence of that at different points, but then I saw a winning team, and they went from, in one particular state where that account executive was located, they went from, in the history of the company, we only had 2 customers in that state. By the next year, they had 18. And
Whoa.
and that was from great communication in that kind of, let's call it roughly 1 to 2 type relationship, where that SDR was working with 2 different account executives, but that one, they were really clicking. So I think it's the right balance of your resources, but I think if you can have deeper relationships, you're going to get, there's so many things that happen outside process and metrics of just, again, great discussions that spark ideas and spark those specific insights that help both parties.
What's a good number of calls per week per account executive?
Yeah, okay, great question. So I would say, if I take the SDR and the account executive piece, right? I think that, again, it comes down to some of the leads in terms of what are you asking the SDRs to do? Are they having to go out and hunt on their own? Is the tech stack mediocre? Well, they're going to have to go find cell phone numbers. They're going to have to be doing a little bit of hunting on their own. They're going to have to be scrappy. So you're not going to be able to make 100 or 150 calls a day because you're doing research in addition to the calls. So I think it's dependent on that. I would try to say that if I have an outbound SDR team, I would want somewhere about around 70% of their day should be either making calls or the process of researching a contact and making a call, because that's why that's the best value they provide. It could, sure. There's technical components like enrolling people into email sequence or a team huddle or a follow-up or one-off conversation. But I'd say that 2/3 to 3/4 of the day should be on the phone. So whatever number of calls they can meaningfully make in that time period, to me, is the important one. Whether that's 50, whether that's 75, whether it's 100, depending on the complexity of the tech stack, that's what I would say. Now, account executives, here's what I would say. It's interesting that in my experience, account executives are great at closing deals. They're great at demo meetings. They're great at follow up. Some of them are not so great at prospecting. And I think that naturally, because cold calling and doing outbound outreach is a time consuming and humbling process, a lot of account executives, they get to that next stage and they think, great, I don't have to do this anymore. The absolute best ones, in my experience, though, they still spend a percentage of their time making outbound and making calls, doing outreach on a daily basis. So I would kind of build in a target of if an account executive can spend 10 to 20% of their week doing outbound outreach, that's a good thing. Because again, yes, they might be getting fed from inbound, they might have an SDR booking demos for them, but if they're doing 2% or 0%, I think it's going to be very hard to get that momentum to generate those conversations. And that's where if it's an hour or two a day on average, well then, yeah, they should, they could get to that 10 to 20 calls. Maybe they're making 50 to 100 calls a week at a minimum. Whereas an SDR, I would say it's probably going to be between 250 on the very low end to 500 or even 750 if it was a very aggressive call.
Got it. I see. So this, when you say for account executive, those 50 calls, and out of those, many could be unqualified or something. So like I was just trying to distill, okay, for account executive, is like 10, 20 demos booked per week a great number? And if they are getting more meetings, maybe it's time for to hire another account executive.
So I think that's a great question. So I think that, when like I think a good lever I like to think about is um, if an account executive's calendar is generally not full enough of meetings, then one of two things have to happen. Either they need to be doing prospecting, or probably a better use of time is get an SCR whose sole focus is to fill their calendars, to make sure that they're doing meetings. I would have a target of if somebody could get to a static state of if 50% of their day was demo meetings, that would be ideal in my
I
mind.
see.
Because the way I think about it is there's thoughtful preparation, there's then follow-up execution. And every deal is a little bit different. I know that there are tools to make it more efficient, to put a proposal or a quote together, to do that follow-up touch. And also there's those other pieces of, yes, if half my day or half my week is doing demos, well then maybe there's an industry association event, right? Maybe the National Utility Contractor Association South Florida chapter is having an event. And if I'm a South Florida rep, I better go. Like that's a good use of half my day to go again, meet people, show up, build a relationship. So I think to me, the right question is, what's that ideal balance? So if somebody is able to have about half their calendar, well then great. That means they're probably doing 4 demos a day. They're probably doing roughly 20 a week. That provides a nice balance. Now, takes time to get to that point for sure. More often, it's like they have one a day, in which case there's a lot of time otherwise, where I would say, the most important thing would be either for an account executive, specific deal follow up, relationship building, or of course, prospecting, doing the outbound work to generate more connections and more meetings.
Another
And I
framework
think
I
that's where I advocate for an SDR team is if you see, and that's the great thing about the different tools you have, if a if an account executive is spending half their day making outbound phone calls and they're not having much success, well, maybe it's because exactly what we talked about. They're great at demos, they're great at closing deals. Maybe they are great at prospecting. So I'd rather have someone else who specializes in booking meetings to help fill their calendars rather than having that account executive be spending 50% of their time doing outbound if they may not be as strong in that area.
was about to say, really great framework. Like 50% of AE's time should be like calendars booked, and it gives a great perspective on. Okay. What are the opportunities?
Yeah, otherwise, you think about it. I use this metaphor sometimes. I'm always big on metaphors. Your account executive, you want them to be, running a Michelin, 3-star Michelin restaurant. But if they're doing, if they're making outbound calls and they're doing demos and going to industry association events and doing follow up, well, now it's like you want them to cook the meal, serve the customers, greet people at the door, process the payments. It's too much. You'd rather have your chef in the kitchen making great meals. That's what their expertise is. So I think that's a perspective I have is when you get to a mature enough point in the organization where, again, you have product market fit, you have a sales team that can execute and close deals. Now add that other specialization function of a team that can book. So that's when you know it's the right time. So I think it comes down to the simplicity versus complexity of the product and how tangibly can you show the ROI. To me, it really comes down to that. And oftentimes, right, in construction, it's either going to be time or money. What can you produce on the other end of that? So the companies that are most effective at sharing that story clearly and efficiently and with the aspect of, I think, building the confidence of the prospect that, hey, you're very similar to these last 10 customers that I've helped to create. You are very much like them. I see your challenges. I hear your objections. Those were their objections too. Here's a result that we often get in your situation. The more that that can be clearly defined, the better. Now, sometimes you have a solution that's multi-phase. It's very complicated. It does a number of things. And so I think sometimes it becomes harder to specifically tie, okay, well, how much does that part of the solution cost and how much will that save? And I think that's where the buying cycle can get longer and the proof of concept might take longer to get to. So I think it comes down to that ability to how simple and efficient your solution is. Can you tangibly measure ROI? That's what's going to really up the rates of close. And you know what? The other piece too is there's a certain maturity aspect as well. I've worked with some companies that over time have built an incredible list, an incredible resource and library of case studies. So if you have video case studies of here's company X. They had this problem. Here's what we did for them. Here's the ROI they received. And now they're in the state and they couldn't be happier for the choice. That story really resonates. The more you have of them that fit and tell a great story, I think it also really helps. At the beginning, it's hard to do that when you have customer number one, customer two, customer number five. I think people are going to be more confident when they see who else have you done it with? Who else have you done it with like me? Hey, if I'm a paving company, I don't want to necessarily know about a result you got with the concrete company. What other paving companies have you worked with? Or, okay, you know what? The other part's geographical. You know what? Yeah, I understand that you had that success with that California company, but I'm a New Jersey contractor. Who in New Jersey do you know? Because I want to talk to them. All these pieces are proof of concept that I think help up your percentage rates in terms of your closing. So at the beginning, that's harder. But if you have the right solution and you can effectively capture that story with confidence, it can really build. I've seen some that are in the 5% range, and given the complexity and the deal cycle, that's fine. I've seen others that are as high as 40%, which is mind blowing. But again, more transactional nature, really clear ROI, and less friction of getting to the result. It's almost like that equation that I really think about, which I didn't even really know until I was after I became a consultant the last year. But you think about Alex Hormozy, right? And like, the perceived likelihood of achievement. And then the as well as the perceived pain to achieve the outcome. So those are massively important principles, and I think it applies really well in sales. So those two things, just another way to look at that same lens. Gotcha. So I would say that, there's kind of a journey that they want to be able to take. And it's hard for founders. I mean, it really is, it's a humbling challenge, especially if a founder's technical in nature and they've done wonderful work in engineering, either of their own products or for other signature companies. And now all of a sudden they have to go sell. It's a mind shift and it's a change. But I feel as though they learned so much from that process by going out and understanding what is the deal cycle like? What does my customer really want versus what do I think they want? All those are great pieces to build that product market fit. And then I feel as though once they get that first 5, 10 customers, and then now it's, like getting that first person that's going to come in and be able to sell. And I think at the beginning, that first account executive, they need to do the whole deal cycle. They need to prospect, they need to do the demo, they need to close the deals. And then you need to have probably at least one more, I would say, that can do it successfully. So I think once you have, I think the part of readiness to say, okay, you know what? Maybe it's time for an SDR team is, the team can close deals, but now you're seeing an opportunity cost of, geez, if we only could get them more. They're great in their demo conversions. We know our ARR. We have product market fit. We're getting good referrals. Now our only blocker is we just need the help to get more meetings. So my plea for founders is know your statistics, right? You need to have a long enough sales history to really know your statistics. Now you can confidently, when I say to somebody, well, hey, okay, how many calls does your team make a week? Okay, we have a baseline. What's their call to connect ratio? Okay. What's their connect to demo ratio? So that's one of the most important for me. Once you have the target prospect on the phone, how often you have a demo? Great. Now, what's your demo to closing rate? What's your average duration from demo to close? Once you know all those things, you have a body of knowledge. Now you can say, okay, I think either we need more time for the sales team to get seasoned to improve some of these numbers, or you know what, we're confident in our sales team, but I think I'd like to take some of the outbound prospecting off their plate. Now it's time to go get the team. So that's the time to call me when someone says, look, I see an opportunity cost of us not adding an SDR function because hey, the sales guys are great. They can do it all. But wouldn't it be more efficient for them if we could get half their calendar filled with demos as opposed to just they get one a day or two a day and they do great if we could only just get more of them. So that's the time when a company is ready to accelerate, when they have, they've got that product market fit, the founders have that knowledge, and of course, it goes without saying, you have the resources too. If you need, when you build an SDR team, whether you work with me or you don't work with me, it's an investment, right? You need to make sure that you are spending time designing the right program. You must hire great people because the difference between an A player for an SDR and a C player is a dramatic impact on the meetings and the quality of the business you have. So it takes time to go recruit a great team. And then the same thing, once they're in the door, you want to roll out the red carpet. I look at the SCRs as the potential future leaders of your company rather than saying they're just entry level hires. Look, they're going to be talking to more prospects and have more voice of customer than anyone else in the company. So let's really make this an investment to see them as a future true impact player. The SDR can become an account executive. Maybe they'll become a sales leader. Maybe they'll become someone even more senior than revenue organization. So it's an investment. So I think you have to have the resources and the willingness to invest both money and time because like any sport, granted, I'm biased because I was a wrestling coach. People just don't get it once and then are great forever. Any professional athlete, any professional in any situation, they need mentoring, need ongoing feedback. That's how they're going to get better. And my teacher mentality is whether somebody is here, here, or here, I'm always going to want to meet them where they are and take them higher. There always is a next level to get to. But without coaching and without that lens, then you're going to plateau at some point, and then you're going to wonder why the return on the investment isn't there. So that's where there needs to be willingness of the resources of money and time and having the right people and the right vision in place. Great question. And I think it all comes down to having a great vision. You know, when I think about an onboarding, I think about, all right, by the end of this training period, what do I want them to be able to do? What I want them to be able to know, and how do I want them to be able to show up in the job? What I want them to be able to do, I want them to be high level, successful booking meetings. I want them to be able to know a really great foundation of the product, and I want them to be confident and excited to be a part of this company. Those are my non-negotiables. That's what has to happen. So again, if you front load and have the right team in place to put a lot of energy into that, I want to try to appropriately challenge SDRs as quickly as possible because they will get better by sure there needs to be an introduction to learn about the company and to meet people and to learn the product. But I think the learning happens pretty quickly when you're on the phones. I was at one time I probably waited too long to put people in to make those first calls and we were delaying the inevitable. And there's a right balance of if you throw someone on the first day and they're going to drown. I mean, that's just completely unreasonable. But I do kind of have changed my tune that there's no reason that, within a week to be having people making their first calls. But I think if you have a great feedback loop and you do have great coaching and you spend the time with the people, there's no reason that within a first month they can't be hitting the targets. I used to believe that it was almost like a 3-month kind of a build, but now I gotta believe that really the hardest part is to almost build the endurance up of the volume because everything is slower. Hey, I go look up this contact and I go to this system and then I check the cell phone number and then I check the website. That's just slower. So really the ramp on volume takes a little bit of time, as well as, of course, all incorporating all the mini learnings of every time you connect. All that takes some time. So I don't think there's any reason where when they first start making calls that, hey, by the end of the first month, now look, you're at the place where you're able to hit those targets. So heading into month 2, you should be there doesn't need to be a 90-day period because I think you can tell right away based on habits and feedback and their character attributes that either they're really getting it or they're not. Yeah, so I'll give you a couple different ideas, and I think that I probably can speak more intelligently to SDR compensation than account executive compensation, but I'll start with the one and I'll kind of move to the other. So I like to kind of build a 70-30 base versus it's called bonus or commission or variable compensation structure that will get you to on target earnings. And so to me, that gives a nice balance. So now that said, I probably could talk about this as a whole separate topic. I have a very strong, from my experience of running different compensation plans and seeing things in action, I have a very strong feeling about I love having people chase really high performance numbers and giving the ability to get paid really well, like extremely well. By the same token, I am less likely to overpay for what I would call to be mediocre or average performance. So that's where I like to create certain targets. Like let's say if demos was the main driver for variable compensation. Well, and I'm just going to pull numbers out to make it easy to understand. Let's say um 10 demos is the expected quota of meetings complete per month for an SDR. Okay. One way to go would say, hey, for most plans would say, I'm going to pay for every demo. I'm going to pay a fixed amount. And then, hey, if you get to 10, you might get a little bit more. What I like to do is two things. I would give an accelerator. Every demo above 10, I might make that double or even triple. So now all of a sudden, wow, there's no aspect of, hey, I got to 10 and I got my $500 bonus. Now I can sit back. Like, wow, I get to 10. I'm going to be super motivated to make every single meeting count because now all these are super valuable. Here's the other thing. I also would kind of put the other side of it of I might not pay any variable compensation until they got to the sixth meeting. Meetings 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. rather than getting a fixed amount, I might say, well, this is what your salary is for. I expect you to get to a certain level. So if you're not even hitting 50% of your quota, well, then I'm not going to pay for those first 5 demos. That's an expectation. That is, again, if you set that up from the beginning and there is people I could get really excited about, well, hey, you know what? If you don't hit the number, it's not good for you and it's not good for the company. So it obviously, if you go and hit super high numbers, it's a win-win. Again, if your team can close deals. If they can't, now you're really overpaying and you're not getting the result on the other side. So, and then I would say, on the account executive side, I would want, to build in a commission structure that would make sure that they're really well incentivized on closing deals. And then also, I would really kind of almost think about at least year one being some kind of a retention component as well. So if something went sideways in the first year, yes, I understand that it might be more of customer success as a relationship, but it also makes sure that the account executive is not just closing the deal and saying, if there's that chance that they're not as transparent as they needed to be, or they're just focused on their own number, that they don't make promises that the company can't deliver. So if they were to sell a deal and then 3 months later, the company walks away, there probably was a disconnect between what was promised and what the company could deliver. So that's where I think retention would be another component of it, where I would think about being smart about that commission structure, that the company should be staying for a particular period to make sure that there is that just level of professionalism on the other side of it, on both sales and customer success. Yeah, yeah. So I think that I'll go in kind of two different camps. If something that was more technical, and there's three I would think of. Something, the Challenger sale is a great one because, and the Jolt effect is the sequel. Those are great. Just understanding that you need to respectfully challenge if you're going to sell, because you're moving someone off of their status quo. And so I think sometimes we try to tend to be collaborators and partners, and all those are good instincts. But at some point, if you don't challenge, you're really not doing them a service. So that's an important one. I would also say Chris Voss's book is a great one. The title I'm drawing a blank on right now. Oh my gosh, I was just talking about it yesterday. I'm sure the name will come to me. Oh, Never Split the Difference. Never Split the Difference. I think that's great for founders because you really understand the art of negotiation and really how communication happens. That opened me up in a way that I still need to go back and read that 5 more times because it's very interesting and it's really an art, which you realize that sales is an art. It's both an art and a science. The third one I would kind of more boil down to mindset, and I don't have it on my bookshelf, but these two I've been talking about all week. This is Trevor Moawad's book, and then this is the sequel, Getting to Neutral, because I think that in sales, what I've come to realize, which is, I felt it when I worked at a software company, but now I feel it distinctly when I'm my own boss, is that a certain level of mindset is required to be successful in sales. It is so common sense that, of course, like, don't take it personally, don't get attached, but we do. We're people, we're not robots. And so I think this book really helped me in a different way think about the key questions of, all right, based on the information you have, rather than coloring it with emotion or how I feel, just what's the next right move? What do I need to do next? And so that to me is a very important thing in sales. And to me, that's been my biggest learning probably from the last year, is to be more um tactical, emotionless, and more driven by, what's the next right move to advance a conversation or a deal. Hiring based on experience, over indexing on experience and under indexing on character traits. To me, my whole process is all about character traits because experience is good, but ultimately I try to set up a process to learn as much as I can about the person because, again, people say certain things, but there's often a disconnect between what they say and what they do. So the more you can try to see and build a process that helps you understand who they are will give you a better understanding of how they can perform. So, and that's where I look for curiosity, resilience, coachability, and I try to build my process to try to see if I can highlight those attributes or the lack of those attributes. To me, that is essential, and I think a lot of founders miss that because they're looking from a more objective lens of experience and other components, and ultimately, there's a lot more to it than that. Yeah, I would say a couple things. Certainly, network twice as much as you think you need to. You just have no idea the power of networking. It's a mistake I made for too long in my career of not networking enough. To me, that would be the number one. And with that, making sure that they are going places to learn from the best. So, get mentored by people and be around people who are great in their craft. Those would be absolutely essential. I would say. And then I think the third is building that mentality of the right kind of thinking to be able to train yourself to be a better executor in high pressure situations. That would be essential. And then I would probably say the last piece of it, keep learning about the industry. Don't just, talk to people around sales. Get to know the real problems that are happening in industry. Because if you do that, you'll be on the cutting edge of knowing and understanding what construction CEOs and project managers and accounting managers, depending on what your solution or software does, if you know the industry, you'll be able to speak to it in an authentic way that others will never be able to do. Yeah, I would say the best thing is probably LinkedIn. So I would say DM me on LinkedIn. I have a website, but for the most part, I would say reaching out to me on LinkedIn is the best way. I do a biweekly webinar where I think it's a great way for people to learn about different aspects of coaching that I do. But ultimately, I would say that's probably the easiest and best way to get in touch with me. And then certainly I have a YouTube page as well. So it's just a kind of a good way to get background and education. But I'd say LinkedIn's probably the easiest. Just DM me and hey, if it turns out that you're at that right stage and you've got your company's at the right spot. I'd love nothing more than have a conversation and see if it's a great fit. I just think this is more just life advice, now that I'm 50 and getting more gray hair, for founders is it's not easy. It's okay to struggle. And it's kind of expected. And so don't do it alone. Build a community, talk to people, talk to peers. I know in my worst moments is when I spent too much time just in my own head or in my office, and getting that frame of reference is really important of, hey, you know what? I'm not alone. I'm not the only one with this struggle. I'm not unique. And also have a life outside of this. As Ferris Bueller said, life moves pretty fast. Look around once in a while or you may miss it. If you have a dog, if you have family, if you have friends, enjoy those things because it's just one aspect of life. It's going to be unlikely that, again, back to the kind of where we began, life isn't linear. It's not as though you're going to get to a milestone and then stop and celebrate and everything will be easy. It's a constantly iterative process of ups and downs and challenges. So find the little wins in each day, find the great people, and most of all, enjoy the work. Enjoy the work as much as you can. There will be parts of the work you won't enjoy that you need to just do. But if you do those things, you'll get joy out of building something. And again, because it's supposed to be building you in the process too. Me too, Mayur. Obviously, we had so much. Maybe we'll do a part two sometime. All right. Thank you. Have a great day.